She said she'd spend Christmas with her in-laws. I said, "Enjoy yourselves." What she didn't know was that I'd already invited everyone else to my villa, the one she never cared to ask about. While she assumed I'd sit home alone, I chose something different, a holiday filled with people who actually appreciated me. But when she saw the photos, she came storming in. And what started as a warm, quiet evening turned into a full-blown scene. Accusations shouting, even the police. That's when it hit me. This was never about Christmas. It was about control, and after 30 years of giving without thanks, I finally gave her something unexpected. Boundaries. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, sunlight pouring in through the wide windows, the scent of cinnamon from the candle still warm in the air. Everything looked festive, cheerful. But inside me, a hollow space opened up. I'd spent weeks preparing this new home, this villa I'd worked my entire life to earn. It was meant to be the backdrop of memories. Laughter, the kind of Christmas where generations gather under one roof. But now it was just me. I leaned against the counter and held the phone like it weighed 100 pounds. My fingers trembled slightly more from disbelief than sadness. Though the sadness came fast after, not loud or explosive, just this dull ache that settled deep in my chest like a truth I'd always suspected but never wanted to face. I wasn't part of her holiday anymore. I wasn't part of her life in the way I used to be. And it wasn't the first time. It was just the first time she'd said it out loud. 3 decades. That's how long I'd been pouring into her life. I remembered the early days when I worked 2 jobs, so Chloe could go to her dream college. She changed majors 3 times, psychology, then communications, then business. Each shift came with new books, new credits, new bills. $60,000 a year, and I paid every dime. "Mom," she'd said once on the phone, "I think I've finally found what I'm meant to do." She didn't hear the strain in my voice when I said I was happy for her. She never asked how I was managing. She just assumed I always would. Then came the wedding. I contributed $45,000 to it, not because she asked outright, though let's be honest, she did, but because I wanted her to have the kind of celebration she dreamed of. I remembered standing at the back of the reception hall watching her dance in a dress that cost more than my first car. Ezra's parents brought a fruit platter. I brought everything else. A year later, she called about the down payment. "Mom, we found the perfect house. It's got a nursery already set up. It's perfect for when we start trying." They never had kids, but the requests never stopped. First it was the HVAC system. Then Ezra lost his job. Again. Then it was the car repair, then the credit card, then the honeymoon they never took. Every time it started the same way, "Mom, I hate to ask." But she never hated it enough to stop asking. I looked around the kitchen again. Granite countertops, double ovens, a wine fridge I'd never used. This was supposed to be my sanctuary, my reward, the place where I could finally stop living for someone else and just be. But I couldn't even make it through the holidays without being reminded of how invisible I'd become. My thumb hovered over the reply box. I could have said something, demanded an explanation. But what would it change? So I typed, "Enjoy yourselves," and hit send. The sound of the message swooshing off into the ether felt like the final click of a door closing. I didn't cry, not right away. I just stood there remembering every Christmas morning I'd spent with her, every stocking I stuffed, every breakfast casserole I made while she and Ezra stayed in bed, every time I smiled through exhaustion just to make the day feel magical for her. And now I wasn't even worth a phone call, just a text. I walked into the living room. The fireplace was already decorated. A stack of unopened ornaments sat beside the hearth. I had planned to decorate the tree tonight. Maybe play that old Bing Crosby album. Maybe even FaceTime Chloe if she had time. Not anymore. I sat on the couch and reached for the box labeled Memories. Inside were old photos. Chloe as a baby, her first Christmas, her school plays, her graduation. I found the photo of us at her college commencement. She was beaming in her robe. I looked tired. Proud, but tired. Behind that smile, I remembered the 2 extra shifts I had picked up that week just to make her final tuition payment. She never knew. She never asked. I had let myself believe for years that my sacrifices were being stored somewhere, accumulated like love in a ledger to be paid back, not in dollars, but in gratitude, respect, inclusion. But now I understood. There was no ledger. Just a balance sheet where only one side ever filled in the numbers. I held that photo for a long time. Then I whispered to no one in particular I wasn't uninvited from Christmas. I was never actually chosen. It was a painful thing to admit even silently. But it was true. And sometimes the truth is what sets you free, even when it breaks your heart first. The morning after Chloe's text, I sat at my dining room table with a cup of black coffee and an old spiral-bound ledger I hadn't opened in years. It had a faded blue cover worn at the corners with a crease down the middle where it had been folded and tucked into drawers too many times. I pulled it closer, the paper rough against my fingertips, and slowly opened it to the first page. It wasn't a traditional accounting ledger, not for a business or some investment portfolio. This one was personal. Painfully so. Each line told a story of giving, of love, of a kind of motherhood I had believed was my duty even when it drained me. Line after line, dollar after dollar, memory after memory. First semester at Emory, $18,650. Textbooks for Psych, $642. Major change new communication course fees, $1,320. Tuition spring term, $19,000. Emergency flight home during breakup, $430. Deposit on her first apartment, $1,800. And that was just the first year. Back then, I still believed we were in it together, that every sacrifice I made was a brick in the foundation of her future. I thought one day when she had her career, her own family, she'd look back and say, "Mom, I never could have done this without you." She never did. I remember one particular conversation just before her sophomore year. She'd changed her major for the second time. The bills had piled up faster than I expected. I sat her down at the kitchen table. Our old house where the faucet dripped, no matter how many times I fixed it, and gently said, "Sweetheart, I think it's time you contribute something, even just a part-time job. Maybe you can help cover your books this semester." Her face shifted immediately. Defensive, hurt, like I'd just broken some silent contract between us. She stood up, arms crossed, and said, "I thought you wanted me to focus on school. You always said my job was to succeed." "I do," I told her, "but we also have to be realistic." She didn't speak to me for 2 days after that. On the third day, I apologized. I drove her to campus myself and handed over a check for the full amount, pretending the tension between us had vanished. She smiled again, kissed my cheek, and said, "Thanks, Mom. You always come through." At the time, I felt relief. I'd preserved the peace. Only now, years later, do I realize what I was really preserving was her comfort at the cost of my own boundaries. Thomas, my older brother, had warned me early on. "She's a good girl, Camila," he'd said once during a family cookout, "but you've got to let her experience a little struggle. Otherwise, she's never going to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet. I brushed him off. "She's just young. She'll grow into it." He gave me a long look, the kind that only someone who's seen the other side of a hard lesson can give. "She might," he said quietly, "but not if you keep softening the ground every time she falls." At the time, I was too busy defending my choices to hear the wisdom in his words. I thought he didn't understand the bond between a mother and daughter. I thought his world, one of strict boundaries and tough love, was too cold. But now, as I turned another page in my ledger, I could see what he'd seen long ago. Wedding venue deposit, $6,000. Dress fittings, $1,200. DJ and catering, $8,500. Florals, $4,100. Chloe's honeymoon gift fund, $5,000. New tires for Ezra's car, $780. The list kept going. I remembered every one of those transactions. Not because of the amounts, but because of how unquestioningly I gave. Not once did she hesitate to ask. Not once did she say, "Mom, are you okay financially?" Not once did she offer to pay me back. Not even a symbolic gesture. I'd built a life where she didn't need to ask twice, and in doing so, I had become invisible, a service provider in my own family. That thought landed like a stone in my chest. It wasn't that Chloe was a monster. She wasn't cruel, at least not in the traditional sense, but she had grown up in an environment where love looked like unlimited support. And I had handed her that definition gift-wrapped and reinforced with every yes. She didn't respect me because I never required it. I gave endlessly, hoping that one day appreciation would bloom where entitlement had been planted. But I never watered the roots of responsibility. I only pruned the consequences. There was one more entry in the ledger I hesitated to revisit. It was recent. Down payment for Chloe and Ezra's house, $80,000. She'd called me in tears. "Mom, we found the place. It's perfect. We just need to move quickly and we're short. I promise we'll figure out a way to pay you back." That was a year and a half ago. Not only had I not seen a dime, but just last month, Chloe asked if I could help cover their property tax bill. I didn't answer her right away then, and she never followed up. I stared at the blank space after that last entry. No amount. Just a question mark. As if some part of me had finally paused, hesitated. My love for Chloe had never been in question. But maybe finally my willingness to enable her was. I closed the ledger slowly. It felt heavier than it had before. This wasn't just a list of expenses. It was a map of my own erasure. A record of every time I'd silenced my needs to protect hers. Every time I'd turned down a vacation, put off retirement, ignored medical appointments, or skipped replacing a broken appliance just so she'd have one more lifeline. And for what? A 12-word text? I set the ledger aside and sat back in my chair. Outside, the wind rustled through the gardenia bushes I'd planted when I first moved in. I'd bought this house not as a monument to wealth, but as a quiet testament to survival. To decades of work-smart investments and putting off what I wanted so that others could have what they needed. But now I saw that maybe I deserved to want something too. Not luxury, not status, just respect. I had to stop confusing unconditional love with unconditional access. I'd given Chloe the world, and in return she had given me silence wrapped in entitlement. That ledger wouldn't grow any longer. Whatever I gave from here on out, my time, my energy, my presence, would be given to those who saw me as more than what I could provide. I folded my hands over the closed book and whispered quietly to myself, "It's not too late to live for me." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it. I don't know what made me reach for the phone that morning. Grief, clarity, maybe even a flicker of defiance. But as I stood in my living room looking out at the quiet street, I suddenly knew what I needed to do. I wasn't going to wait around hoping Chloe would change her mind. I wasn't going to sit alone in a house I had built from the ashes of my sacrifices, pretending that the silence wasn't deafening. This year, Christmas would look different. This year it would be mine. I pulled up Thomas's number and pressed the call button before I could second-guess myself. He answered on the second ring, his voice as familiar and grounding as ever. "Hey, Cam. Everything okay?" I smiled, already hearing the suspicion in his tone. Thomas knew me too well. "Yeah, I'm all right. I wanted to ask if you and Marie have plans for Christmas." There was a pause. We were going to stay and maybe have dinner with the Hendersons, but nothing set in stone. Why, I took a breath. "I'm hosting at my place, Christmas Eve." Another pause, longer this time. "You're hosting." His voice rose slightly with disbelief, then softened. At the new house I nodded, forgetting for a moment he couldn't see me. Yes, it's time I filled it with something more than boxes and echoes. Thomas exhaled through the phone a warm, low sound. "Camila, I think that's the best thing I've heard all month. We're in. Absolutely. You want me to bring anything?" I laughed lightly, my first genuine laugh in days. "Just yourselves. And maybe your apple pie if Marie's up for it. You got it. And hey, he added, what about Stella and Lucy? You think they'd come? I hadn't thought of that. But the moment he said their names, I could see their faces. Stella with her sarcastic warmth and sharp eyes. Lucy, soft-spoken, but always present when it mattered. Women who had walked beside me during some of my loneliest seasons. I'll call them, I said, already opening my contacts. One by one, the conversations unfolded like forgotten gifts. Stella answered with her usual flair. Camila Mitchell, is that really you gracing my caller ID? I smiled. It's me. And I have a proposition. Oh, I love propositions. As long as they don't involve climbing ladders or joining a gym. No ladders, just a dinner table. I'm hosting Christmas Eve. Would you come? She didn't hesitate. Try and stop me. Do I get to dress fancy as you like? Lucy was gentler, her voice tinged with quiet surprise. You're hosting Camila, that's wonderful. I'd love to come. I added one more call. To David and Elizabeth Whitaker. Dear friends who had once stood beside me when I launched my consulting business, back when no one else believed I could succeed on my own. David answered, Camila. It's been too long. David, I know it's short notice, but I'd be honored if you and Elizabeth joined me for Christmas Eve dinner. I'm opening my home. There was a beat, and then his voice brightened. Absolutely. We'd love to. You sound lighter, somehow. Maybe I am, I said. By the time I hung up, my guest list was complete. 7 people, not many, but every name on that list was someone who had seen me, not as a source of income, not as someone to be tolerated out of obligation, but as Camila. A woman with history, value, laughter, and stories. The house, still new-smelling with hints of polished wood and faint paint, suddenly felt more alive. I walked room by room, imagining where the tree would go, where the extra chairs should sit, how the candles would glow in the foyer. It was mine. Every tile, every window pane, every inch had been earned with patience and quiet strength. I spent the afternoon cleaning, not out of compulsion or anxiety, but as a kind of reverence. I fluffed pillows, polished silverware I hadn't touched in years, and laid out the linen napkins I once saved for a special occasion. This was it. When I got to the fireplace mantel, I paused. Something tugged at me. An emptiness among the garland and ornaments. I went to the hallway closet, opened an old box labeled Mom's Things, and pulled out a small photo frame. It was my mother taken sometime in the late 70s, wearing her Sunday best, standing in front of the old elm tree we used to climb as kids. Her eyes, even in black and white, sparkled with that quiet fire I'd always admired. She wasn't a woman of many words, but what she said always stuck. I remembered her telling me once when I was 17 and terrified of being judged. Camila, you don't need anyone's permission to be who you are. Not then, not now, not ever. I set the frame carefully on the mantel, a tribute to the woman who taught me that strength didn't have to be loud, that sometimes dignity was found in the choices no one applauded. By the evening, the house had begun to take on a glow. The tree was trimmed with simple white lights and deep red ribbons. The dining table stood bare for now, but in my mind, I saw it filled with roasted vegetables, sliced ham, mashed sweet potatoes, and Stella's garlic rolls. I sat on the couch with a glass of wine and allowed myself to breathe. No longer in anticipation of Chloe's call, no longer weighed down by guilt, or the need to prove anything. This was my Christmas, not in defiance, not out of spite, but as a declaration. I am not just a bank account. I am not a placeholder until better plans come along. I am a woman with stories, with laughter, with worth beyond what I can give. For the first time in years, I looked forward to setting the table, not for a daughter who only came when she needed something, but for people who came because they wanted to be here. And somewhere deep inside, I felt my mother's voice again. You don't need anyone's permission to live your truth. So I didn't ask. I just lived it. The doorbell rang at exactly 5:58 p.m., 2 minutes ahead of schedule, and my heart gave a quiet, grateful flutter. I wasn't nervous. At least not the way I had expected to be. No more second-guessing my decision to host Christmas Eve, no more wishing for a different text message from Chloe. That doorbell was the sound of something new, something I had chosen. I opened the door to Thomas and Marie, both wrapped in their coats, cheeks pink from the cold. Thomas held a bottle of Cabernet in one hand and a pie carrier in the other. Marie smiled warmly, already stepping forward to hug me. "You look incredible, Cam," she said, stepping inside. "And this house, my God, it's even more beautiful than the pictures." Thomas whistled low, taking in the curved staircase, the soft gold lighting, the smell of roasted rosemary and cloves floating in from the kitchen. "This is you," he said simply. "This whole place. It feels like you." I smiled, not just because of the compliment, but because he was right. For once, I wasn't trying to make a home for someone else. This space was mine down to every tile and cushion. Not long after the others arrived in a small wave of joy and familiarity, Stella, of course, made an entrance. She wore a deep burgundy dress with a matching scarf and carried a tin of her infamous garlic rolls. "Only slightly overbaked this year," she said with a wink. "But if anyone complains, I'm taking the rolls back." Lucy followed quietly behind her, holding a bouquet of fresh eucalyptus and white roses, which she immediately placed in the vase I'd left empty on purpose. She knew me well. Then came David and Elizabeth, dressed like they were attending a gallery opening. David clapped his hands together as he stepped in. "Camila Mitchell, this home is a masterpiece," Elizabeth added. "It's warm without trying. I don't know how you pulled that off." I laughed, leading everyone into the living room where soft jazz played through the sound system I had installed last month. The fire was already going, flickering softly beneath the white stone mantel where my mother's photograph stood quietly, almost like a silent guest. Wine was poured, coats were taken, laughter began to float through the air like it had always belonged there. Stella flopped onto the velvet armchair and waved her glass. "Okay, Camila, tell us the real story. When did you decide to do this?" I sipped from my own glass and smiled. "About a week ago. I got a message that made things very clear for me." Thomas caught my eye, and his gaze said everything without needing words. He understood. They all did in their own way. Sometimes I said quietly, "You don't realize how heavy something is until you finally set it down." They nodded. Not a single person asked about Chloe. Not one pitied me or treated me like someone left behind. And it was in that small, graceful silence that I felt most seen. We moved into the dining room as the catering team brought out the prime rib, mashed butternut squash, honey-glazed carrots, and Stella's rolls. The table shimmered with gold-rimmed plates, linen napkins, and tapered candles that cast shadows like soft lace. As we ate, stories flowed freely. David told the one about when we first pitched our consulting services to that tech firm that thought we were too old to understand social media. We ended up tripling their revenue in a year. I remember Stella said between bites, "Camila walked into that room like she owned the floor." And she did. Lucy turned to me. "I still remember the day you told us you were finally ready to retire. You looked relieved, but also like you weren't sure who you were going to be next." I wasn't, I admitted. I thought stepping away from work meant stepping away from purpose. But turns out my purpose was just waiting for me to stop postponing it. Marie raised her glass. "To Camila. For showing us what it looks like to start over with grace." The clinking of glasses echoed like a heartbeat through the room. My eyes welled not from sadness this time, but from the unfamiliar warmth of being celebrated for who I was, not what I could give. There was no tension, no performance, no walking on eggshells to preserve someone else's mood. Just friends who had known me through storms and sunshine, all gathered to share something real. At one point, Thomas leaned toward me and said, "You know what I see tonight? I see a woman who finally moved herself to the top of her own priority list." I didn't answer right away, but I felt it down to my bones. Later, as we gathered around the fire for dessert, Stella's tiramisu and Lucy's apple crumble. The lights dimmed slightly and the quiet settled in like a blanket. I looked around at the room full of faces, every one of them lit by candlelight and gratitude. And then it hit me. I wasn't lonely. I'd just been in the wrong rooms for too long. The difference was startling. Loneliness, I realized, wasn't about being alone. It was about being unseen, misunderstood, reduced to the role someone else assigned you. For years, I had been the bank, the fixer, the fallback plan. I kept hoping that if I gave enough, I'd be invited into their hearts the way I had invited them into mine. But tonight there was no performance, no striving. I had done nothing to earn this moment except show up as myself. And that was enough. As the night wore on, we shared more stories. We talked about travel plans, about small regrets, about things we still wanted to learn. Marie confessed she wanted to take pottery classes. Elizabeth admitted she was considering writing a book. David said he was planning to stop dyeing his hair and just go full silver. "I want to look like an old man in peace," he joked. "It's the new freedom." Even the laughter that followed felt healing. When everyone finally gathered their coats and gifts and said their goodbyes, there were no lingering glances toward the door, no unspoken tensions. Just hugs, real ones. Thomas was the last to leave. He pulled me into a quiet embrace and said, "I'm proud of you, Cam, for letting yourself be loved the right way." As the door clicked shut behind him, I turned off the music and walked back through the empty house. It no longer felt too big. It felt just right. And as I looked back toward the dining room, the candles still flickering the remnants of dessert scattered across half-empty plates, I realized something I never thought I'd say. I didn't miss her. Not because I didn't love my daughter, I always would, but because for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel lesser without her. I wasn't erased. I was just finally standing in the light of my own life. And it was beautiful. The phone was face down on the side table near the fireplace, but I felt the vibration through the wood floor before I even heard the sound. A low, persistent buzz that cut through the warmth of conversation and the clink of wine glasses. I didn't have to look. I already knew who it was. I reached for it with a calm that surprised even me. The name flashed on the screen, Chloe. I excused myself gently from the room, giving Stella's shoulder a soft pat as I passed. She looked at me with a knowing glance, but said nothing. Then, the hallway was quiet, lit by soft sconces that cast amber pools of light along the walls. I stepped into my office and closed the door behind me. The house was alive with laughter just a room away. But here it was still, silent. The kind of silence that used to unnerve me. Tonight it felt like armor. I answered. "Hello." There was no greeting on the other end, just the sharpness of my daughter's voice slicing through the line. "What the hell is this, Mom?" I held the phone away from my ear slightly, not in shock, just to give myself space from the force of her tone. "I saw Patricia's pictures on Facebook," she continued. "And I'm sorry what you're throwing a party at some mansion I didn't even know you owned." Her voice was rising. Not angry in the way someone feels hurt, angry in the way someone feels out of control. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence stretch just long enough for my own heart rate to settle. Then I said simply, "It's Christmas Eve dinner. You didn't even tell me you bought a house. How long have you been hiding this? I didn't hide anything, Chloe. You never asked." She scoffed. "Don't twist this. You deliberately left me out. You invited everyone but your own daughter. Now I let my voice lower, not in volume, but in steadiness. You sent me a message, Chloe. You said you were spending Christmas quietly with Ezra's family this year." "That's not what I meant," she snapped. "I didn't say I didn't want to see you. I just meant, I don't know, that we wanted a calm morning, not a whole scene." I took a breath, my fingers tightening around the phone, but my voice didn't waver. "I'm going to read your message back to you, just so we're both clear." I tapped the message and read it aloud word for word. "We'll spend Christmas quietly with Ezra's family this year." "That's it. No, we'll see you later. No, can we stop by? No, are you available for dinner?" Just a firm statement. She didn't speak. I could hear her breathing short and hot. "Chloe," I continued, "I took you at your word. For once. That's all. But I didn't mean it that way," she blurted. God, you're being so calculated. I stood near the window now, looking out over the back garden lit by the soft pathway lights. No, Chloe. I'm being clear. There's a difference. You didn't even think to check with me. I let out a quiet, breathy laugh. Check what? If I was allowed to have a Christmas that didn't revolve around you. Wow. So now I'm the villain in this story. I didn't answer that. Her voice turned sharp again. You've always said Christmas was about family. And now you're hosting some exclusive dinner with people I barely know. What is this, some kind of punishment? I blinked slowly, absorbing the accusation. It's not a punishment, it's just not for you. You made other plans. You're seriously acting like I told you to never speak to me again. No, I said quietly. You just told me in your own words that I wasn't part of your plans. And I believed you. She went quiet again. I imagined her on the other end pacing her living room, Ezra probably nearby pretending not to hear. You're blowing this way out of proportion, she said eventually. I moved back toward my desk, tracing a finger along the polished edge. Chloe, you've told me for years, through actions and words, what my place is in your life. I'm the backup plan, the wallet, the one who shows up and fixes things, pays for things, absorbs your stress. But this year I made a decision to show up for myself instead. That's not fair, she whispered. Isn't it? I said, still calm. When was the last time you called just to ask how I'm doing? She didn't answer. When was the last time you included me because you wanted my presence, not my resources? Still nothing. I'm not mad at you, Chloe, I added. I just finally accepted the reality you've made very clear. Her voice came back quieter but bitter. You're trying to make me feel guilty. No, I said softer now. I'm trying to stop carrying guilt that doesn't belong to me. She exhaled loudly. You've changed. Maybe I have, I replied. Or maybe I've just stopped apologizing for expecting respect. I can't believe you're doing this, she muttered. And I can't believe it took me this long, I said back. For a moment I thought she might hang up. The silence on the line felt final, like the edge of a cliff. Then with a tone that chilled me, she said, This isn't over, Mom. I nodded even though she couldn't see. I know. And then I hung up. Not in anger, not in defiance, just in peace. I stood there for a long moment, letting the air settle around me. Letting the sound of clinking glasses and laughter from the other room remind me where I was, who I was with, and what I'd chosen. For the first time in 30 years, I had stood firm. For the first time, I hadn't begged for understanding or pleaded for space in my own daughter's holiday. I had simply taken it. And as I placed the phone back down on the desk, I felt no guilt, no regret, only clarity. She'd drawn a line. I'd just accepted it. And in doing so, I found the strength to draw one of my own. The knock wasn't really a knock. It was a pounding, an angry, unrelenting series of fists slamming against the solid oak of my front door. It rattled the hinges and silenced the conversation in the living room. Wine glasses paused mid-air. Laughter died instantly. In its place, a ripple of confusion. Then the voice came sharp and unmistakable. "Open the door, Mom, Chloe." I froze for just a second, caught somewhere between disbelief and dread. I had hoped our last phone conversation, uncomfortable as it was, had been the final word. But deep down I must have known she wouldn't let it go that easily. I moved toward the door with slow, deliberate steps, already hearing murmurs behind me. "That's Chloe," Stella whispered. "Should we—" Lucy didn't finish her question. Thomas met my eyes from across the room. His face was unreadable, but his body had already begun moving to stand with me. Another bang, louder this time. Ezra's voice joined hers, hesitant and uncomfortable. "Camila, come on. Can we talk?" My hand hovered over the lock. "Chloe," I called through the door, not shouting, just loud enough to be heard. "This isn't the way. Don't tell me how to act," she screamed. "You humiliated me. You think I'm just going to sit at home while you throw some party like I don't exist." I turned slightly, catching glimpses of stunned guests behind me. Patricia had put her phone away. David and Elizabeth exchanged glances. Stella stood with her arms crossed. No one said a word. Chloe. I tried again, softer this time. I asked you to talk with me calmly. This isn't calm. Let me in, she shrieked. I'm your daughter. I looked through the peephole. She was standing right at the threshold, her face red hair disheveled from the cold wind, eyes wild. Ezra stood behind her, hands in his coat pockets, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might have been peeking through the windows. Then, before I could say another word, she turned to him. Give me your phone. What are you doing? I asked through the door. Calling the police, she snapped. You want to pretend like this is your perfect little world? We'll see what the cops say when they find out you've been hiding money and locking out family. Elder abuse is a crime, Mom. I took a step back. Inside, gasps rippled through the room. Did she just say elder abuse? Lucy asked, horrified. She's calling the police. Elizabeth blinked. For what? Because she didn't get invited? Stella said bitterly. Thomas put a hand on my shoulder. Let me handle this. I shook my head. No. No. If she called them, I'll speak to them. About 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 2 patrol cars pulled up quietly, the engines low but unmistakable. The room fell into stunned silence. My guests, people in their 60s, 70s, dressed for a holiday dinner, stood awkwardly, unsure whether to sit or stand. The doorbell rang. A sharp, polite tone. I opened the door to 2 officers, one older, with gray at his temples, and a calm demeanor. The other younger, carrying a tablet. Good evening, ma'am. I'm Sergeant Ramirez, and this is Officer Lanning. We received a call about a possible domestic disturbance. Yes, officer, I replied with a composed voice. Please come in. Behind them, Chloe stood with her arms folded and an indignant expression. Ezra stayed near the curb. Sergeant Ramirez's eyes scanned the room as he stepped inside. Fireplace glowing, music, soft guests, calm and holding half-full glasses of red wine. Not exactly a crime scene. Would you mind telling us what's going on? He asked. Chloe stepped forward, inserting herself between the officers and the living room. This is my mother's house. I've been locked out of my own family's Christmas. She's hiding assets from us from the family. She's been emotionally abusive for years. I believe this qualifies as elder abuse. Ramirez turned toward me. Ma'am, are you in any physical or emotional danger? I blinked at him. No, officer. I'm hosting a Christmas Eve dinner for some old friends and family. My daughter declined to join us. She sent a message earlier this week saying she had other plans. Do you have that message? Officer Lanning asked, already tapping something into his tablet. Thomas stepped forward and pulled out his phone. She sent it to Camila. Camila forwarded it to me. Here. He held it up. We'll spend Christmas quietly with Ezra's family this year. Ramirez read it, then looked back at Chloe. Is this from you? She hesitated. Yes, but that's not what I meant. It was just a text. I didn't mean I never wanted to come. Ramirez nodded slowly, his expression neutral but firm. We understand. However, based on what we're seeing, this doesn't appear to be a domestic disturbance. It's a private gathering in a private home. No laws have been broken. Chloe's voice cracked. You're just going to let this happen. She's cutting me out. She's replacing me with strangers. Patricia stepped forward, clearly, done holding her tongue. We're not strangers. We've been in Camila's life for decades, and quite frankly, no one here is trying to replace anyone. We're just here because we respect her. Ma'am, Officer Lanning turned back to Chloe. Unless there's been a threat or actual danger, we're not in a position to intervene. Filing a false report is serious. I recommend you think very carefully before escalating this further. I'm not leaving, Chloe hissed. You're going to have to, Ramirez said gently but firmly. You've made your point. Now it's time to respect private property and let these folks enjoy their evening. Ezra finally stepped up from the driveway, hands raised in surrender. Chloe, come on. Let's go. She turned on him. You're taking her side. He didn't answer, just looked at her, then back at me. His eyes tired. Ramirez gestured toward the door. "We'll walk you out." Chloe glared at me one last time. "This isn't over, Mom." I met her stare and said nothing. I didn't need to. As they stepped outside, Ramirez turned to me one last time. "You have every right to host whoever you choose in your home, ma'am. We apologize for the disruption. Have a peaceful evening." The door closed behind them. The guests stood frozen, unsure of what to say. Then Stella muttered, "Well, that was festive." A few chuckles followed. And slowly, like the warmth returning after a cold gust, the room came back to life. Thomas poured another glass of wine. Patricia began fixing the throw pillows that had shifted. David cleared his throat and said, "I believe dessert is still on, yes." And just like that, the evening continued. But something had shifted, not in the air, not in the mood. In me. I had always feared that confrontation. I used to think standing up to Chloe meant inviting war. But I'd just done it. Not with shouting, not with drama. Just by not folding. And in doing so, I realized something I never knew I had. Power, boundaries, peace. I looked around the room. My room. And saw faces that hadn't wavered. Friends who hadn't judged. A brother who had stood beside me. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel ashamed of choosing myself. I just felt free. I opened the front door again after the officers had left, just as Chloe and Ezra were turning toward their car. She stood on the sidewalk, shoulders tense, lips pressed into a tight line. Ezra looked like he was trying to disappear into his coat. "Chloe," I said calmly, "would you like to come inside, just to talk? Privately?" She blinked, surprised. Maybe she thought I would slam the door in her face. Maybe she assumed I was finished for good. But I wasn't done yet. Not because I owed her a chance, but because I owed myself the peace of saying what had gone unsaid for far too long. Ezra glanced at her, unsure. "I'll just wait here," he mumbled. Chloe stepped forward stiffly, her heels clicking across the stone path. She didn't say thank you, didn't look at me, just walked past and entered the house, the tension trailing behind her like a storm cloud. I guided her toward the office, quietly closing the door behind us. It was the same room where I had taken her call earlier, where I had drawn the first real boundary of my adult life. Now she stood here in person. Still my daughter, still someone I loved. But no longer someone I feared disappointing. She stood near the bookshelves, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. I waited. Let her speak first. "I can't believe you actually went through with this," she said finally. "Posting photos, inviting everyone, like I'm some stranger. I didn't post anything," I replied gently. "Patricia did. You knew she would. You knew I'd see it. And what would that change?" I asked. "You made your plans. You made your choice. I didn't say I didn't want to see you. You didn't say you did either." She threw her hands up. "This is insane. One message and suddenly I'm the villain." I moved to the side table, picked up my phone and unlocked it. "This isn't about one message, Chloe. It's about all of them." She turned sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" I began scrolling through our text history. "Let me show you something. Here are the last 10 messages you sent me." I read them aloud, slowly, deliberately. "Mom, can you help us cover the roof repair?" "Mom, Ezra's hours got cut again. Can we borrow just until next month?" "Mom, we're behind on car payments." "Mom, the water heater went out." "Mom, do you still have that extra credit card?" The room was silent except for my voice and the soft sound of me flipping through each line. "You've never once asked how I was doing. Not in any of these messages, not even just to check in. You only reach out when you need something." She shook her head. "That's not fair. It's not untrue." "You don't know what it's like to struggle in this economy," she snapped. "Ezra and I are doing our best. You've always had more—" I set the phone down. "More, Chloe. I worked 2 jobs when you were little. I skipped vacations, medical appointments, home upgrades, everything so I could put you through college. So you could have your wedding, your house, your life. You didn't have to do any of that," she shouted. and then instantly regretted it. I nodded slowly. You're right. I didn't. I chose to. Because I believed that's what love meant. But somewhere along the way, love stopped being mutual. It became transactional. One direction only. She blinked hard and her voice trembled. You've changed. I sat down across from her. Yes. I've changed. Or maybe I've just stopped pretending this is normal? Her hands clenched into fists. You've been listening to Uncle Thomas, haven't you? He's always hated how close we were. This has nothing to do with Thomas, I said softly. It has everything to do with me. With finally listening to that voice inside me that's been whispering for years that something wasn't right. Chloe turned away, pacing. So now I'm the bad daughter. The ungrateful one. I didn't say that, I said, but you're thinking it. I'm thinking you're a grown woman who's had 30 years of my time, my energy, my sacrifice. And yet when I finally do something for myself, for once, you treat it like a betrayal. She stopped pacing. Because you didn't tell me anything. You bought a house, hosted a party, changed your life, and shut me out. No, I said, standing. You shut yourself out. I just stopped leaving the door wide open. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. I needed help. And I needed respect, I replied. I needed acknowledgement. A phone call that didn't come with a request. A holiday invitation that didn't assume I'd just show up with gifts and money. You make it sound like I've never loved you, she whispered. I didn't answer immediately. I walked to the window, looked out at the quiet lawn, the frost gathering at the corners. I think you loved what I could do for you. I think you loved knowing you had someone who would never say no. But that's not the kind of love I want to keep living in. Chloe sat down slowly on the edge of the armchair, her voice much softer now. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know I said, but intention doesn't erase impact. For a while, neither of us spoke. Just the quiet hum of the heater, the faint sound of laughter from the other room, and the weight of too many unsaid things pressing in. I just feel like I don't know who you are anymore, she said finally. I'm someone who's learning to put herself first, I said. Someone who's tired of being reduced to a bank account with a heartbeat. Chloe looked up at me, eyes wet, but defiant. I guess this is who you are now. Cold. Selfish. No, I said gently. This is who I've always been. You're just not used to seeing me say no. She stood, crossing her arms again. You'll regret this. I already regret how long I let it go on. She moved toward the door. I love you, Chloe, I said before she opened it. I always will. But I will no longer tolerate being treated like a transaction. She didn't respond. Just walked out. And I let her go. Not with anger. Not with spite. With peace. The kind that comes when you finally speak the words that needed saying. The kind that stays even when someone else walks away. The moment Chloe stepped back into the living room, the energy shifted. Conversations fell off mid-sentence. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. The quiet comfort that had filled the house only minutes earlier was replaced by a heavy, watchful tension. Everyone looked up, unsure of what to expect. But what followed wasn't surprise, it was revelation. Chloe stood in the center of the room like a storm barely held together. Her chest rising and falling with shallow, angry breaths. Her eyes scanned every face as if she were measuring the loyalty of each person in the room. I need everyone to hear this, she began, voice loud and brittle. My mother has been hiding money from her own family for years. She bought this house in secret. She kept it from me, her only daughter, and lied to us about what she could afford. She's been sitting on investments while making it look like she struggled. A stunned silence fell over the room. No one moved. No one responded. It was as if we were all waiting for her to stop to breathe, to realize what she had just said. But she didn't pause. She made us feel guilty for asking for help, all while living like this. She continued waving a hand at the carefully curated elegance of my home. She excluded me from Christmas, so she could play the role of generous host with all of you. She's betrayed her family. Stella was the first to rise. Slowly, she set her wine glass on the side table and stepped forward, her tone calm but firm. Camila hasn't betrayed anyone, she said. She's been supporting you for decades. We all know it. We've seen it, heard it. We've watched her sacrifice over and over while you treated her like a vending machine. Chloe spun toward her. You don't know anything about our family, I know enough, Stella replied evenly. I know what it looks like when someone gives without ever receiving. I know what it feels like to watch a friend be taken for granted and say nothing because she always insisted you were just going through a rough patch. Lucy stood as well, her voice softer but resolute. Camila has spent her life making sure you never went without, but you never once asked her if she was okay. Chloe's face reddened, her hands tightening into fists. Of course you'd all take her side. Her side. David's voice cut in now, incredulous. This isn't about sides. This is about basic respect, about seeing someone for more than what they can give you. Elizabeth moved beside him. We've known Camila since before you were born, Chloe. We were there when she stayed up all night balancing books and consulting for 3 clients just to send you to school. We were there when she turned down vacations and postponed her own retirement to pay for your wedding. Chloe's eyes darted toward Ezra, who was still standing near the doorway, unsure whether to intervene. Ezra, she snapped, are you seriously just going to stand there? He looked at her. Truly looked at her. And something shifted in his expression. His voice came out quiet, tired. You've never respected her, he said. Not really. You talk about her like she's a backup plan, like she's not a person, and honestly, I think I just let it happen. Chloe blinked, stunned. You're not helping. I'm not trying to help, he said, stepping further into the room. I'm trying to be honest, for once. She turned back to me, then desperate now. Mom, are you just going to let them gang up on me? Are you really going to let them do this in front of me? I stayed seated, hands calm in my lap. I haven't said a word, I replied gently. But I'll say one now. I stood slowly and took a step forward. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You've had 30 years to learn how to be grateful, Chloe, I said. And every time you chose something else, you chose to see me as a resource. You chose silence when I needed connection. You chose entitlement over empathy. She shook her head. That's not fair. It's the truth, I said simply. Chloe looked around the room again, searching for someone. Anyone. To support her. But no one spoke. No one moved. Patricia, who had remained silent until now, finally stood up. I remember when Camila made her first big investment. She came to me and said she was terrified, that she was betting on herself for the first time in a long time. And she made it work. Not because anyone handed her anything, but because she never stopped learning planning working. That wealth you're so angry about, it didn't fall from the sky. She earned every cent, and she never owed you any of it, added Lucy. Not her money, not her home, not her holiday. Chloe looked back at me, now smaller somehow, like her certainty had shrunk into confusion. She took a few steps toward me, her voice cracking. I just wanted to be part of your life, I held her gaze. Then you should have shown up for me the way I showed up for you. She stepped back like I'd slapped her. You've changed, she whispered again. No, I said softly. I've just stopped apologizing for wanting to be seen as a whole person. She looked at Ezra again, who only shook his head. Then to Thomas, who didn't even blink. Then back at me. I guess this is what I get for needing help, she said, bitterness lacing every syllable. No, I said gently. This is what you get when help becomes expectation, when love is replaced with leverage. Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. She turned back to the room and said louder, "You all think you know the truth, but you don't. She's not perfect. She's not innocent." "No one said she was," Thomas said, stepping forward. "She's just finally choosing herself." "That's not a crime." The silence that followed was heavy, but not painful. It was the kind of silence that comes after a long, overdue conversation. Chloe stared at me one last time, her voice quieter now. "You'll regret this." But I didn't flinch. I just looked her in the eye and replied, "No, I regret how long I waited to say this." She stood there breathing hard, her shoulders rising and falling. "You still don't get it," she said. "I'm your daughter." I nodded. "And I will always love you." But love without respect isn't a relationship. It's a transaction. And I'm done making deposits into something that never grows. With that, the room stayed quiet. She left without another word, and no one followed her, not even Ezra. For the first time in decades, I wasn't trying to fix it. I was just letting it be what it was. Truth, consequence, and freedom. Chloe stood frozen in the middle of my living room. Her arms were limp at her sides, her face pale, her mouth slightly open like she still had something to say but couldn't find the words. The fire crackled behind her, casting soft flickers of gold across the room. But none of that warmth reached her. Not anymore. Ezra had quietly stepped back toward the front door. He looked drained older somehow. He wasn't fighting anymore. He wasn't trying to reason or persuade. His eyes met mine for a brief second, and there was something there. Not quite apology, but something like quiet resignation. He knew. He had known long before this night was over. But Chloe wasn't done. "Mom, please," she said, her voice strained, but not because of volume. It was the kind of strain that comes from someone who knows the walls are closing in. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just wanted to talk." I looked at her, not coldly, not with bitterness, just with the stillness that comes from reaching the end of a very long road. "We talked," I said gently. She took a step forward, then stopped. Her eyes darted around the room, maybe searching for sympathy, for backup, for someone to interrupt what was coming. But no one moved. No one spoke. They just watched, quietly, respectfully, like witnesses to something sacred, even painful. "I can do better," she said louder now. "I will. I swear, Mom, I'll change." I felt my chest tighten, not because I believed her, but because I knew she believed herself. And that was the saddest part. She thought change was a promise, a performance. But real change doesn't come from panic or fear of losing access. It comes from truth. And Chloe wasn't ready for that truth. Not yet. "You can't change," I said softly. "If the only reason you're willing to is because you lost something you thought you'd always have." Her face fell. "That's not fair." "No," I replied, "it's just honest." She stepped back again, a single tear slipping down her cheek. But her voice was still holding on to something. Anger, pride, maybe just the idea that if she held out long enough, I'd fold like I always had. "I'm your daughter," she whispered. "You're seriously choosing them over me." I shook my head slowly. "I'm choosing myself." Thomas, who had stayed quiet through all of this, finally moved toward the door. He reached for the handle and opened it, the cold night air rushing in like a sigh. "Chloe," he said, his voice low but firm, "it's time to go." She turned toward him like she might argue, then looked back at me. "This isn't over," she said, voice tight and trembling. I met her gaze. For me, it is. Those words didn't come out with fury. They weren't meant to wound. They came from a place that had finally healed enough to stop bleeding. She stood there for a moment longer, her breath visible in the doorway. Then she turned and walked out past Ezra, past Thomas, past the people who had once cheered at her wedding and held her hand at baby showers that never happened. She walked out into the cold night, and for the first time no one followed. No one chased after her. And that's how I knew the shift was real. I closed the door behind her. No slam, no ceremony, just a quiet click, the kind that comes at the end of a chapter. I stood there for a beat, hand still on the doorknob, eyes closed, letting the weight of it all settle in. 30 years of caretaking, overextending, hoping. 30 years of believing that if I just gave enough, she'd come around. That she'd become the kind of daughter who didn't just love me, but saw me, respected me. I turned around slowly and faced the room. No one spoke. No one needed to. Stella stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. "You did what most people can't," she whispered. "You stood up, not against her. For yourself." I nodded into her shoulder, but I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The grief had already passed. What remained was something sturdier. Thomas came beside me and said quietly, "You okay?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "I am. Finally." Lucy began clearing dishes from the coffee table. Patricia poured another round of wine without a word. David adjusted the logs in the fireplace. It was like the room itself had taken a deep breath, as if the house, too, had waited a long time for this to happen. There was no applause, no celebration, just a sacred kind of calm. Later that night, when the last guest had gone home and the house was still again, I stood in the doorway of the living room. The lights had been dimmed, but the fire still glowed. The echo of laughter lingered in the walls, but so did something deeper. Peace. I sat down on the couch and let myself sink into the cushions. I had done the hardest thing I'd ever done as a mother. Not because it was harsh, not because it was final, because it was real, because it was necessary, because saying goodbye to someone you love doesn't mean you hate them. Sometimes it means you finally love yourself enough to stop bleeding for someone who never asked you to stop. I didn't hate Chloe. I never would. But I couldn't keep living in the space where love meant erasing myself. And that night, when I finally turned off the last light and climbed into bed, I didn't feel empty. I felt free. It was close to 2 a.m. By the time the last car pulled out of my driveway, the wind had quieted. The stars blinked over the villa's dark roof, and the frost was just beginning to settle on the edges of the lawn. Inside the fireplace still glowed, faintly warming the space where only a few hours earlier my life had shifted. I stood near the door, my hand still resting on the knob from where I'd said goodbye to Stella and Lucy, their hugs lingering longer than usual. Thomas had left just before them, wrapping his arms around me and whispering, "You chose yourself. Finally." His words stayed with me. They weren't loud or dramatic, but they were everything. Not because he was surprised, but because I had surprised myself. I walked back into the living room, now quieter, softer, dim. The dishes had been cleared, the music turned off, the wine glasses rinsed and lined along the counter. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. As I passed the coffee table, I saw a folded note Patricia had left behind, scribbled in her unmistakable slanted script. "Next year we host New Year's here. Same people, no drama, just joy." I smiled. Joy. It had always seemed like something reserved for other people. For those with simpler families, or gentler daughters, or lives that didn't carry years of invisible sacrifice. But tonight, I had found it again. Not in the perfect meal or the glowing lights, but in the quiet courage of finally drawing a line and holding it. I turned off the last of the lights and went upstairs, taking my time. No rush, no tension, no lingering dread. Just a soft awareness that this home, this life, was truly mine now. I slept deeper that night than I had in years. No dreams, no interruptions, just rest. The next morning, Christmas Day, sunlight poured in through the east-facing windows of the kitchen. The kind of light that feels like a promise. I moved through the house slowly, barefoot, still wearing the same soft flannel robe I'd worn for years. Only this time it felt like a garment of comfort, not armor. I brewed my coffee without urgency, added a splash of cream, and walked it over to the small breakfast table by the garden window. Outside the yard sparkled beneath a thin glaze of frost like the earth had dressed itself in silver for the day. I opened my planner, an old-fashioned leather-bound one I still preferred over any app, and flipped to a blank page. At the top, I wrote 2025, the year I choose me. And below that, I began to list everything I had once dreamed of but always put off. Spend a month in Italy, learn to make fresh pasta, take a photography class in Paris, hike the Scottish Highlands in spring, wake up in a small town in Ireland, no alarm, read poetry by the sea, laugh with strangers who become friends. It wasn't a bucket list. It was a blueprint. For decades, my calendar had revolved around Chloe's needs: Ezra's setbacks, family emergencies, loan deadlines, college schedules, utility bills that weren't mine. I had run on a calendar that never once asked what I wanted. Until now, I took a sip of coffee and felt a quiet thrill buzz beneath my skin. Not from caffeine, but from possibility. My phone buzzed beside me. I glanced down and saw Stella's name. Her message was short. "You taught all of us what self-respect really looks like. Thank you." Then another message, this time from Lucy. "We'll be here whenever you're ready. For travel, for Tuesday dinners, for whatever comes next." Then Patricia. "Today is the first day of your real life. Let's plan something soon. Love you." The tears came then. Not the kind that sting or choke. These were soft, gentle. The kind that cleanse. I had always been the strong one, the fixer, the dependable one. But now I was becoming something more whole. It struck me how quickly we forget ourselves in the service of others. How easily we trade our own story for a supporting role in someone else's. I had done that for 30 years. And I did it willingly, lovingly. But love without balance isn't sustainable. It's a slow erosion. And last night I stopped the erosion. I looked around my kitchen, this space I had once imagined sharing with grandchildren who never came with holidays, that never unfolded the way I'd pictured. I used to see those as failures. Now I saw them as space. Space to fill with my own vision. Space to dance barefoot in the kitchen at midnight with music playing too loud. Space to create a new kind of legacy. One rooted not in how much I gave, but in how fully I lived. Later that morning, I bundled up and stepped out onto the back terrace. The air was crisp and fresh, the kind that wakes you all the way down to your bones. I closed my eyes, breathed in deep, and felt every corner of my being unclench. I was 63 years old. And for the first time, I felt young again. Not because I'd turned back time, but because I had stopped giving it away. The door behind me creaked, and I turned to see Thomas poking his head in. "Morning," he said. "Didn't think you'd be up this early." "I've never felt more awake," I said with a smile. He stepped out onto the terrace with me holding his own mug. "Stella texted me. Said she's already planning New Year's here." I nodded. "She doesn't take no for an answer." He grinned. "Neither do you anymore." "That's new." We stood in silence for a while, watching the sun rise a little higher. Then he said quietly, "You've always been strong, Cam. But last night, you were something else. You were free." I looked out over the frosted garden, the breath curling from my lips. "I don't feel angry," I said. "That's how you know you made the right choice." I glanced at him, a thought forming. "What would you say if I told you I was thinking about booking a trip to Paris in the spring?" He looked surprised. "I'd say it's about time." We both laughed, and that laugh carried light and certain into the cold December air. When I went back inside, I opened my laptop and pulled up my travel bookmarks. I didn't hesitate. I started planning. Maybe Paris in April? Maybe Florence in June? Maybe an open return ticket just to see what freedom feels like on the road. Christmas, I realized, hadn't ended a tradition. It had begun a life I thought I'd lost forever. One where I wasn't waiting to be invited. One where I was finally at home, with myself. Have you ever felt like your presence was only welcome when it was convenient, or that love came with conditions? until you finally said enough. Camila's story is not just about a mother and daughter. It's about reclaiming dignity, setting boundaries, and learning that peace sometimes begins when you stop waiting for an apology. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments. Have you ever had to choose your own well-being over someone you loved? We'd love to hear your journey. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss another powerful story of quiet strength and healing. Your support means everything.